Sound awakens something deep within. Welcome to this podcast, a space to slow down, tune in, and return to the song of your soul. In this third episode, I am joined by Kathleen Karlsen, who is a mantra practitioner, kirtan leader, composer, focused on healing and transformative power of sound. She is also the author of Vocal Medicine and Flower Symbols. Thank you so much, Kathleen, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here.
Really a pleasure to have you here with us.
It's great to be here. Been looking forward to this for a while.
Thank you. Start off by asking you, what first drew you to the world of sacred chanting?
Mhm. There's been a couple of things. One thing, way back when I was a teenager, I went to a conference at the Edgar Cayce, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is in Virginia Beach. So I went to both high school and college in Virginia. And the conference that I went to, I literally blew my life savings. I turned 16, I had a job, I could drive, and so I went down there. It was about an hour drive from where I lived, stayed all by myself, in a hotel and stuff. And the conference was the ancient healing temples of Egypt. And they talked about using color and using sound, and that in a prior life, Edgar Cayce had been a priest who had been out of Egypt. And when he returned to Egypt, he was over 100 years old. So they brought him in there and they reversed his age until he was back in his 20s so that he could stay. They wanted him to stay and be the high priest and, contribute to their culture and everything there. So when I heard that, it was like I was already doing music. I loved playing the piano and I was an artist. And when I heard that, I thought, this is it. This is why I'm here on earth. This is my mission. It's learning how to use music and color and form for healing. So that was the initial thing. And then, fast forward to probably early 20s, and I attended another conference. So that's what I would that's what I would do. I would save my money, I would travel. I lived in several spiritual communities, so my family wondered what was going on because I was supposed to go to medical school and be a brain surgeon, and I ended up traipsing around the country, going to all kinds of religious groups. And so I ended up at a rebirthing conference, and there was one evening that was not part of the actual conference, but one evening they had, entertainment, and they had someone who'd been to India who started chanting, and I'd never heard anything like that before. And I was super inspired. I went home. I was working as a waitress in the summer. It was in between probably my sophomore and junior year of college. And so all summer long, I got up in the morning and I would start a fire in a little hibachi grill because they said it was powerful if you chanted over fire or over water. So I did that all summer. I'd get up early in the morning and chant over this grill. And I didn't know that mantras, I didn't know anybody else in the world who did them. I thought it was something that was only done in India,
Right.
And so when I went back to school that fall, there was no place for me to chant in a dorm. I was living in a dorm. And from that point, it was a jump 30 years into the future. And I went to a Christmas party, and a friend of mine, her son had just spent about 9 months, I think, in India at the Yogananda ashram. And he had a harmonium with him, the instrument that is often accompanying. And so it was a Christmas party, but the hostess invited him and said, oh, he's just come back from India. Would you sing something for us? So he sat down and played the harmonium and did a chant. And I was like, that's it. I was just at the point where my youngest was 7. So I have 5 children. So that meant the oldest was 12 years older. So 19. So they were growing up.
Right.
And I was looking ahead because my whole life had been invested for 20 years, 25 years, in raising 5 kids. But I was already looking ahead because I knew that it would be too hard for me to let them grow up if I didn't have something that I was passionate about. That's just, sort of my mode of being. So that's what it became. I contacted the man who had led those chants, had led that chant at the party, and he was holding an event a couple times a week, and all dedicated to Yogananda. So a lot
Mhm.
of Yogananda's chants are in English, and then sometimes he would do something in Sanskrit. And so I did a 2-hour round trip twice a week for months, as long as he held the events, to go.
Wow.
And then when he left to travel and never, he's back now in the area, but that's like 10 years ago. But there was this long period, and I thought, okay, I have to learn to do this myself, because I mean, I'm in Montana and there's
Right.
just not a lot of this. So that's when I started training and learning how to play the harmonium, and just, studied day and night, and just was totally in love with all of the mantras and just learning everything I could. I usually am up by 4 in the morning,
Mhm.
and so that would be my quiet time, even when I still had all the kids living at home. So from 3 or 4 in the morning until 7 or 8, I could really concentrate. And so it's like 7 years now that I started actually leading events and
Mhm.
teaching other people and doing workshops. So that was sort of it. I had the first experience, then I had another exposure in my 20s.
Right.
And then when it came around this time, it was like, okay, it's like now or never.
Right. And that's beautiful. Like how you knew as a teenager that that's what you wanted
Yeah,
and you pursued it full force, and the universe guided you to be here today doing what you love.
yeah, yeah. I'm grateful. It's it's
Yeah,
been it's been uh, it's been an exciting path.
that's awesome. Yeah. And did you learn these chantings by yourself or did you have someone teaching you?
So there's a yoga studio in town,
Hmm.
and the wife is the owner. It's a husband and wife. So the wife is the owner of the yoga studio, and the husband owns a music studio.
Okay.
So I started asking everybody, do you know anybody who chants, anyone, that could work with me on this? And so I got referred to him, and he gave me some basic harmonium lessons. It's not his main instrument,
Hmm.
and kirtan music and mantras is not his main thing, but he's just a brilliant guy who's multi-talented, and he's actually the one who produces my music now.
Wow.
So he was my first contact, and then I went down to Colorado,
Uh-huh.
and I studied with Mike Cohen.
Uh-huh.
So I took 3 levels of training with Mike Cohen at the Kirtan Leadership Institute.
Mhm.
And then I would search online, and I would call people and email people, and just anything that was as close as I could get to
Right.
how to use the voice for healing and how to use the voice for, spirituality and transformation. And because there wasn't much here in Montana, I ended up going to Seattle. I was invited to attend a conference for the Threshold Choir,
Hmm.
which are people, who uh, they're working with people in hospice. So they're singing people over to the other side.
Okay.
And they invited me because there was nothing, they didn't have any chapters or anything in
Mm.
Montana. So this was the closest thing. And although I really appreciated it, and it's just an incredible service that they
Mhm.
provide, I felt like my mission was more to sing people to life,
Right.
to help people to heal and ground here in this world,
Right.
rather than singing them to the other side. So I didn't
Yeah.
pursue that.
Yeah.
And I went to a sound healing conference in San Francisco.
Mhm.
Um, and I was there just because I wanted to hear about mantras and kirtan. I mean, I went to the other things with tuning
Right.
forks and whatever,
Right.
but I was disappointed because there wasn't nearly as much as I had hoped. It was still, I guess it was still fairly new. So after all of that, I mean, I was like spending all my money and traveling all over, and I still had kids at home and a busy life, and I was still working full time for a
Mm.
software company. And so coming back from the last training with Mike Cohen,
Mhm.
I was driving back from Colorado. I had 2 of my kids with me, So my daughter, who was probably 21 or so at the time, and then one of my kids was having a birthday the weekend that I was going to the training. He was turning 16. He was homeschooling. He was a
Okay.
really dedicated skier. So I just couldn't leave him on his 16th birthday.
Right.
So they got an all expense paid trip down to Boulder, Colorado, and they went sightseeing and everything. So they were with me. And when we were driving home,
Mm-hmm.
the car broke down.
Oh no.
And so we pulled into some little tiny town in Wyoming, and they looked at the people looked at the car and they said, it's going to take us 2 days to get parts to fix the car. We drove it into the shop. And so my 16-year-old says, Mom, come here. So he pulls me out. He said, did you hear what he said? He said they drove it into the shop. That means it's drivable. He said, give me the keys. I'm going to get us home. So, it was like, okay, he said, there is no way. So, he's like, there is no way I'm spending 2 days in this little town in Wyoming over my birthday.
Right, right.
So we got on the highway, and sure enough, we were only 20 miles down the road and the car broke down again. And
Oh,
the same guy who had towed us to the first shop towed us to the second shop, which was really embarrassing. It was like, he must think we are absolute idiots. He already towed us to one shop. We got back on the highway, he broke down again. So we had to get the car towed to Casper, Wyoming, and rent a car.
mm-hmm.
That's about 6 hours from here, rent a car. And by the time all of this was over, and of course, when you rent a car, my daughter and my son couldn't drive because I think you have to be 25 to drive a rental car.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, it was a very intense situation. I had been up from 3 or 4 in the morning. By the time we were driving over the pass, this was the 1st of May, it
Mm-hmm.
was 2 o'clock in the morning. I had been up almost 24 hours. I was responsible because they're both asleep by this time, and it started snowing. And it was like the last straw. And I had this intense fiat, like, that's it. From now on, it's coming to Bozeman. Mantras, kirtan, this is going to be the center. Like, things are going to come here. And, sure enough, Krishna Das came like the next year to
Oh my
Bozeman,
God.
Montana. It was like crazy. But he happened to have a nephew who had, an aunt who was here, and she's part of a little spiritual community that's here. And they arranged the whole thing. So Krishna Das came to Bozeman, like sold out show, 450 people or something. And so, yeah. So now I've just stayed here. And actually, there's another kirtan leader, Julie Southwell, that I've
Mm-hmm.
just been playing with the last year or two. And she had traveled and played with the Hanuman Project and, Jayutal and Girish. And, she really has been part of the kirtan world. And I was like, come here. Yep, move to Bozeman. And yep, we'll do it here.
Right.
So she's one of the main people that I play with now. So Jake, that is my producer, and
Mm-hmm.
Julie and I have like a little kirtan band, and my husband comes and plays percussion and runs the instruments. So there's a lot going on in an unusual place now. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Like how your intention brought Krishna Das there, and then you created that whole community yourself after that.
Yeah. It really has been amazing.
Yeah.
There's another group. There's a man who was a professional in the Spanish-speaking music world. He and his brothers, I think they were out of Chicago, but he grew up in a band. It was 9 kids, 5 brothers, and the 5 brothers formed a band. So he lives about an hour and a half from here, and
Okay.
he does kirtan every week as well. So it's like, and he'll explain what he's doing in English and then in Spanish, and he
Okay.
does a lot of live online kind of things to reach people that are in South America. So that's sort of unusual in the middle of Montana too, you know?
True. Yeah, that's
He's,
beautiful.
he's great. So every now and then I play with him as well.
Nice. So do you guys hold Kirtan sessions every week then?
I have varied.
Okay.
I through the winter, I was doing 2 to 4 a week.
Okay.
And then now that we've gotten into the summer, um, I'm doing 1 a week here in Bozeman in a studio.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will probably do one a week outdoors, like in a park. I mean,
Okay.
not one a week, one a month.
Okay.
And then one in a park. And then if there are things going on in the next little town over where my friend Julie
Mm-hmm.
lives, so there'll be something going on,
All the
probably
time.
almost every week, but not necessarily right here. You have to travel in Bozeman. I mean, you have to travel in Montana. So
Okay.
in Bozeman and then in some of the other towns. So yeah, probably about once a week.
Once a week, roughly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Like how it's intensifying that place with these mantras and chants and all the lively energy.
Yes, and it's such a beautiful, pure place. I mean, it really, I think the motto is the last best place. I think that might be true.
Wow.
It's a great place for spiritual practices.
Yeah. Tell us, like, how has chanting transformed your life?
I would say it's transformed on a number of levels. One level was physically just
Mm-hmm.
healing.
Mm-hmm.
When I hit probably my mid 40s, my health wasn't great. I had all kinds of things. I had, back problems, and I had been on thyroid medication for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I that was one of the main things that I worked on. I really, because of course when you're chanting, you're using your throat chakra and the thyroid is right there. So you're sending all the vibrations, through the thyroid gland. And I would I would get hoarse after about an hour of chanting at first. And also it was very emotional for me. I found that in order to sing,
Mm-hmm.
that if I hadn't transformed traumatic events or anger or sadness or whatever, that would get in the way of singing. Like you get a lump in your throat when you're emotional,
Yep.
you know? So what I found, especially in the beginning, is I would chant for a while and then sometimes I would just be crying, and I had to move through all of that in
Mm-hmm.
order to sing. And I just loved singing the mantras so much that I was willing to do that work. So there was work that was going on with the mantras, and
Mm-hmm.
then there was work that was going on outside of that in order to free my throat
Release.
chakra and, my emotions and solar plexus and everything in order to sing, because
Mm-hmm.
I also had a very quiet voice. That was just something that was cultural. Like when I was a little kid, I was not a quiet kid, but my mother is a very genteel woman. She's just a beautiful, intelligent woman, but very soft spoken, and so I would be told, Kathleen, can't you modify your voice? Can't you, tone it down? Like, don't laugh so loud. Don't be so loud, basically. So I internalized that, and I
Mm-hmm.
was very soft-spoken and didn't speak up for myself, that kind of thing, which I think is fairly typical
Mm-hmm.
with women. And also my father was military. He was a colonel. He was probably a bit to the right of Captain Von Trapp. Like, there were only four of us, but when we sat at the table at dinner, you had to raise your hand and say the number of your birth order in order to speak. Like I'd have to raise my hand, number two, and wait
Okay.
until I was recognized, because
Right.
I was the second. My brother's older. So anyway, all I'm saying is you didn't speak back to my dad. That's
Mm-hmm.
the basic point here. Like it was absolutely never, you know. Um, so with those two things, a mother who was very ladylike, I was more of like a tomboy athlete kind. And so a mother was very ladylike, and a father who was very strict and very structured. Um, that wasn't something that I learned much growing up. So that was part of it too, learning to speak up in relationships because it was all tied, you
Right.
know, to being able to sing the mantras, being able to speak to God, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like you also have to be able to speak to the people around you and have healthy relationships. So that was probably a main transformation. It did, after 20 years on medication, it took me probably, I'd say 9 months to a year. And then it just so happened I had a holistic doctor, and she would test me, and because my thyroid had been pretty severe, I would have like cracked and bleeding hands in the winter. I'd be exhausted partway through the morning. I would be freezing cold even in the summer. So I had pretty significant thyroid problems. And so I would try to cut back on the medication. She would retest me. No, no, you're still out of range. So I kept working it back and forth and back and forth. And then once I added the mantras, in addition to the journaling and the psychology and essential oils and herbs and everything else I was doing, that was just the key ingredient. But she retired partway through that process for me. But I knew, because I knew the symptoms so well, that when I stopped having the symptoms, then and I hadn't been taking the medication for months, I thought, well, it must be okay.
Mm.
And then finally, during COVID, so about 5 years ago now, I went in, I had just a sinus infection or something, but they were really cautious at that point. This was like the fall of 2020. So while I was there at the hospital, I said, well, could you draw blood and do a thyroid test for me? And it came back normal. And I
Wow.
was like, wow.
I know.
So that was physical. Um, and in the process of healing that, it really did help to transform my relationships, especially within the family.
Mhm.
Um, things like, uh, because we had so many kids who were teenagers at the same time, like 4 moving through and 1 younger, we had like a whole fleet of beater cars outside of our house, probably 7 cars for 6 drivers, because there was at least one that wasn't working. And so I really felt like it also had to do with having personal power and having my own boundaries.
Mhm.
So there were just other things that I did, like, okay, I want to own a car in my own name, like I've worked hard, and I I just want to have my own car. So there were just simple things like that. I had to make the decision to stop signing student loans for my kids for college, because it was clear that that was not going to be possible for 5 kids. And your the way that you deal with finances
Mhm.
is an energetic exchange.
Mhm.
So I had to make that decision, which was really hard. Like, every parent wants to be able to send their kids to college if their kids want to go. So I had to sit the boys down and tell them, if you want to go, you'd better get a scholarship or you'd better get a job,
Mhm.
because uh, I signed the loans for my daughter to go to school for years, and I could see I can't do this 5 times.
Right.
So there was a lot that went on, and I really felt like the mantras, you find your own voice,
Mhm.
and that is just so fundamental. You find not only your own voice, but your connection to an energy outside of yourself.
Mhm.
Whatever you're calling that, it's like you can feel a response. When I would chant and then I would stop, it was like you could feel like this buzzing electric energy, that you had connected to something. You connected to something that was beyond yourself. So, with all of those levels, yeah, it was transformative in every way. It became my main spiritual practice.
Mhm.
So I spent a lot of time in prayer when I was in my mid 20s to mid 30s and actively living in a spiritual community. I probably spent 5 hours a day,
Wow.
and that was a lot of the 10 years that I was there. And those were actually most of the prayers that we did in that community were spoken, but they weren't sung. They were spoken, but it was like, so it was somewhere in between.
Mhm.
It wasn't usually silent prayer, but it wasn't as musical, as mantras. So I had a momentum on that, but over time, and I wasn't that interested in meditation. Like,
Mhm.
I'm just a really active person.
Right.
I love music, I love the arts. Now I'm starting to appreciate and work with meditation and work with yoga. Um, but it was just a perfect practice for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's awesome to know. And I could relate to most of your stories, like where you were explaining how physically, emotionally, and all of these changes were happening within you. Like I could I was part of all of those as I was chanting and going through, and I could totally relate how certain things change certain things in me, and how we do find our voice, and how our power within us just activates manifold, and we can speak up,
Hmm.
and things do happen around us that are very powerful with these mantras, because they're like little potent balls of energy that open up and activate these latent cells within us.
Hmm.
So, in fact, they're opening up these spaces and pouring us with all this energy that is just very supreme.
Right. Yeah, it's like it reforms you, like
Yeah.
the work of Hans Jenny with
Mhm.
cymatics, where the sound, like the Sri Yantra here, it's a manifestation of, the Mahalakshmi mantra, as well as just the sound of Om, so each mantra is creating a pattern. It's creating
Mhm.
a pattern, an energetic pattern, like you said, that can affect every cell and can send out like ripples in a pond, into your world.
Mhm.
And I would say that's probably how I use the mantras the most now, is actually as a form of prayer. Originally it was more transformation for myself.
Mhm.
And I would say I also became just more comfortable in my own skin, just there was just a level of more of an eternal view of life, I guess. You
Right.
know, like all sometimes maybe this happens with you too. Sometimes if I'm at a party or at a wedding or just with people where everybody is just, nothing is serious, everybody's just happy and eating and drinking and, carrying on. And there's a sense like it's just a curtain, like it could just move away and there would be something else there. I don't
Right.
know how to explain it. It's like it feels like things are more transitory. Maybe with the mantras, when you can connect to a more universal source of energy, then the patterns that we see right around us are less, I wouldn't say less concerning, but feel less oppressive, because there is a sense that it's temporary. You know,
Right.
this is these are not necessarily exhibiting eternal patterns. So I don't have to be so attached to it.
Right.
And I don't have to worry about, did I say the wrong thing? Did I look the wrong way? Because it's like nothing.
Yeah.
Like that's, in the bigger scheme of things, it's just like the slightest blip on a screen kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's made me just more comfortable in life. Like I'm I'm much more comfortable walking into any situation now, because it's like it all matters, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You're attached, and at the same time, you're detached.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you feel authentic in yourself.
Hmm.
You feel empowered to just tackle anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
So,
just a manifestation of
yeah.
something greater.
Yeah. So
That's it.
there's no pretense.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me about, how can you take us back to your very first chant that
Okay.
you've chanted, and how did you feel, and how did it shape your path?
Okay. The first one that I really worked with and learned was Sita Ram.
Mm-hmm.
So just Sita Ram, JJ Ram. And there was a young woman at the time who came over, and she had learned a very basic version of
Uh-huh.
Sita Ram, just like on a beach in France or something, And so she came over, and I was like, well, can you tell me how it went? And she couldn't really remember very well how it went. So, so I just came up with something that was a simple version that I thought was sort of like what she remembered.
Right.
And my husband laughs. He calls it my Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star version of mantras, because it's literally like Sita Ram,
Right. Right.
And so that was probably the first one. And what I discovered was that because it is such a new practice for most people who would come to my events locally,
Mm-hmm.
they loved it. it was like they could understand it, they could relate to it. There was only like what, 3 words in the whole chant, and it was a very simple melody, and it was very how would you say, not I was a very new harmonium player for
Mhm.
one thing. So the accompaniment was very simple, was just, playing the melody and holding a drone or something. So it sort of reinforced everything. But it made it relatable and
Mhm.
easy for people. And that was funny because then every time that I would do anything, like a few times there were new yoga studios opening, and they would want me to come and, play music at the opening. And people were requesting, play Sita Ram, play Sita Ram. And also, I really worked with it. Um, I can remember one time I was practicing it, and I was really paying attention to how each note felt
Mhm.
as I was singing it, how the
Mhm.
words, how each word and each note felt. And I had studied some that there are software programs now that can test your voice.
Mhm.
Like I think there's 4 different companies. There's one in Boston, I forget the name now, but they're developing voice software that can diagnose illness.
Wow.
So if there are certain tones that are not as strong, then they can relate that to a possible weakness in the digestive system, or that there could be something with the heart. So they're really putting a lot of research, because you do have like an imprint in your voice. So
Mhm.
it's reflecting, the strength of
Mhm.
your physical body. So I thought about that, and I noticed that every time I hit the note E, which in that one was Sita Ram,
Mhm.
that note was more difficult for me. Like,
Okay.
and it was just, there was something about, like I would lose volume, and lose strength on that note. So I really concentrated, and I just did it over and over and over. Sita Ram, Sita, and really worked with that, because I thought, well, I don't know what organ or what system the note E is related to, but clearly that one doesn't flow for me
Right.
as well as the other ones. So all I'm saying is that I would take a mantra and work with it very intensely, and really pay. So I guess that was sort of a meditation, like really pay attention to like every nuance in
Mhm.
every note, and then go back and spend an entire hour just working with 3 notes, for example, and so yeah, so that was sort of the first mantra that I really like became my friend. That was, I really had a relationship, with that mantra. So yeah, that was Sitaram.
Well, that's beautiful. And I heard that's a very powerful mantra. And that was the first one. The Rama was the one which Valmiki, the person who authored Ramayana, used.
Mm,
He was uh, he was not a spiritual person before that,
mm.
but Sage Narada came down and gave him this mantra, Rama. So he could not pronounce Rama because he was not filled with that energy. So he was pronouncing it the opposite way, Mara, 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 Mara. But in essence, it's still coming out as Rama because so that's when his life has transformed and he was able to author Ramayana.
Ah, I had not heard that story. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
That.
know, the other the other story about using Rama as a chant, there
Mhm.
was a couple. One, I took a teacher of mantra course, like at a distance from Namadeva,
Mhm.
who has since passed on. He's an American, Thomas Ashley Ferrand. And he was teaching the Apadamapa mantra, which
Uh-huh.
is much longer,
Right.
very powerful healing mantra, but much longer and more difficult. And when he got to the end of teaching it, he said, well, you could just chant Rama. Like it would, because it would be, he said, it's so deep, just
Uh-huh.
that word,
Yeah.
the Ra with the solar energy and the masculine, and the Pingala, and then, so the Shushumna and the spine, and then the 2 main nadis that go like the caduceus around the
Right.
spine. So the Ra is for one, and then the Ma is for the Ida, or the feminine one. And he said, just by chanting Rama, you could raise the Kundalini, with just chanting that. So I thought, wow, that's great. So I did learn the more complicated one, but I love. I'll just chant Rama, 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 Rama,
Right.
and that is it's so joyful. It's
Mhm.
really great. And then I started studying Tulsi Das,
Mhm.
so the founder of modern Kirtan, and he had a situation where he had already become famous as a
Mhm.
teacher
Mhm.
and translating scriptures into the common languages and teaching people mantras and so he'd become famous for his spiritual abilities. He was
Mhm.
well respected. So there was a woman whose husband had died,
Mhm.
and she was traveling through the town where he was living. Her husband was on a cot, and she was just absolutely distraught. And she saw Tulsidas. And she said, you must come here. You must raise him. You can do this. You can raise him from the dead. And he gathered all the people around and he said, we will chant the name of Lord Rama. And they chanted the name of Lord Rama, and the man was resuscitated and
Wow.
got up and walked home. So I thought, whoa. I mean, if it could, raise somebody from the dead, all my problems are nothing. I'll just chant Rama.
Yeah, it's a beautiful mantra. From your book, is there a specific chant or a chapter that feels especially close to your heart?
hmm Yes, I think there's the middle section of the book. So it's in 3 parts or four
Mm-hmm.
parts. And the third part is enhancing the power of mantras.
Okay.
And that is all about, using sound and color and understanding the connection, between all those different things. So the synergy. And so I got a master's degree from California State University from Montana. I did it all at a distance. And what I was studying was the history of the connections between sound and color.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, looking at all the musicians who felt that sound was producing color, and
Mm-hmm.
then the artists who felt that color was producing sound, and then all the connections between those things, like synesthesia, when people will hear a sound and it creates, a color for them. So connecting all of that, one of the things that Mike Cohen told me when I was discussing it with him is that there's colors associated with all of the different deities.
Mm-hmm.
So Lalita, the goddess Lalita, for example, is a pink goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really crazy experience with that. I went to a place about 90-minute drive from here in
Mm-hmm.
Montana. So
Mm-hmm.
there are megaliths in Montana, just like Stonehenge,
Uh-huh.
but they're sort of scattered across the state, and some are on private land, some are on federal land. So I went on a tour. There's a woman in Helena here. Her name is Julie Ryder,
Mm-hmm.
and she is quite an expert in all of the megaliths around the world, but in particular, the ones that are in Montana are her expertise. So my husband and I went on a tour. That was my birthday present to him one year. And there was a formation called the Pink Vault,
Uh-huh.
which is pink or rose granite, which is surrounded by black granite. And
Wow.
it's a very unusual formation. And she said that when she's had geologists and people come and look at the things that she studies, they said that that one was the most likely to be man-made rather than natural, because you wouldn't get that pink granite encased in the other granite. So so I was just very attracted to that particular formation. So I was over there just hanging out, and Julie was across a little gully, and
Uh-huh.
she said, "Hey, Kathleen, sing a mantra." So so I just started singing a mantra to Lolita,
Right.
just like, standing next to these gorgeous big rocks. And she had turned on her video camera, and then she thought she turned it back off, but apparently it was still on. So she didn't see anything or know anything at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I started singing this mantra to Lalita. My husband joined in, he knew the mantra, and it was just, a short thing. And then the next morning, she called me up early in the morning. She said, "You won't believe this." She said, "I thought I turned the camera off, but it was still on. And I caught an image of a pink waterfall coming down, where, like, right next to where you were chanting."
Oh my gosh.
And so I still have a still frame. It was just a short video, probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 9 seconds or something. But it was absolutely clear, this pillar of pink light coming down. So I told Mike Cohen about that. He said, well, the goddess Lolita is associated with the color pink.
Wow.
So so that, there's a few chapters in the middle of the book where I talk about that experience and talk about other experiences where I guess the idea is that it's all one, and
Mhm.
you can reach the same source energy, whether it's through chanting or whether it's through visualizing light, but they are connected,
Mhm.
like people with near-death experiences
Right.
that will say that they saw, like a kaleidoscope of color, and there
Mm.
was music coming out of it, but it was all the same. It was all one.
Right.
So that was those kind of phenomena were the things that I studied for my thesis.
Uh-huh.
My master's degree was, tracing all the way back from, Plato all the way through like modern multimedia, all the ways that people have tried to synergize, different art forms. Um, so I love that,
Yeah.
just bringing in other forms of art that are all because all creativity, even in the scientific world, they say that the state that a person's brain is in when they are creating something,
Mhm.
creating a piece of art, creating a piece of music, it's the same state that they're in when they're in prayer.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Makes
it's
sense.
just that, yeah, it's, you're connecting, you're
Yeah.
connecting. So
Yeah. It's
that was my favorite, my favorite things to look at, and my favorite part of writing the book as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I can see that joy coming forth in your words. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned how Mike Cohen explained about goddess Lalita being pink color goddess and the color associated with her. So I was with Mike Cohen doing my first performance um, in Lakewood, Colorado at
Hmm.
the Kriya Yoga ashram, my Guruji's ashram. So I did my first performance. I shared the stage with them and I did the Lalita mantra,
Mm.
like some of the chants I did. And one of his teammates also mentioned something around those lines where she saw a ball of pink light coming from where I was chanting that mantra. So I mean, I did not see it because I was chanting, but she called me back later on and she told me about it.
Yeah, that is cool. That is
Yeah.
very, very similar.
So yeah, I was like, wow, that's similar to what I've heard. I mean, I didn't know that the pink is associated with goddess Lalita until you told me now. But yeah.
Yeah. And it's a good thing to sometimes I'll reflect back on that, because there's going to be times in any spiritual practice where you
Mhm.
feel like, is this doing anything?
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, you're always going to go through that period.
Mhm.
It's the same in a relationship. You
Mhm.
don't go through decades being married without having some
Mhm.
ebbs and, high points and low points. So sometimes I'll remember that and
Mhm.
think, okay, even if I'm not feeling it, I
Mhm.
will do the practice because I've had evidence that there's something that's happening. There's something that's manifesting. So it is fun to have some evidence or some witnessing,
Yeah.
from someone else to say, yeah, there was something happening,
Yeah.
when you were doing that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes, there will be moments like that where we do question our practice or our faith or whatever, but then we get right back in because we know for a fact that we belong there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for tuning in. Take a deep breath, carry the peace with you, and I will see you next time.